Built for structured logging, Seek lets you filter and exclude events by type, search by event properties, build dashboards, and configure alerts in seconds. Seek helps you troubleshoot and resolve issues more efficiently than ever before. Available as a simple Windows installer or Docker image, try Seek for free now at datalust.co/SEQ. That's datalust.co/SEQ. Hi, I'm Scott Hansel, and this is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today I'm chatting with Pelonomi Moiloa. She is a CEO and co-founder of Lelapa and a data scientist and an AI expert. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am very well, and I'm excited to see you again. We got to spend some time together in Sweden, and we're going to see each other in South Africa later this year, where you live usually and where your company is based. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is your company is called Lelapa AI, and one might think that it's one of these AI companies that popped up in the last 2 weeks when the entire world got excited about AI. But you've been a data scientist for years. You've been an AI person for years. What does it feel like when your life's work and your passion intersects with the entire world freaking out about AI at the same time?
I mean, it's a bit of an existential crisis. I think a lot of people in the world will probably be annoyed with me saying that because I seem young. But no, it's been absolutely crazy. And I'm giggling to myself because we kind of did just start a month ago, not quite 2 weeks. I mean, not officially. We've been working on this for a very, very long time. And yes, I've been in the field for even longer than that. But it's absolutely insane that all of a sudden people know what I talk about when I talk about my job and my work. Before I would when you're at a party and they're like, oh, so what do you do? And then I would stumble and my voice would go really soft and I would say, I'm a data scientist and I work on AI, and their eyes would kind of glaze over. And then they would look to the side of my head and get distracted by something. But now they're like, oh, ChatGPT. And I'm like, okay, well, at least we're winning with that.
Doesn't that feel strange though, that all these data scientists and all these machine learning experts, suddenly their whole life is now a chatbot? That's what has captured the audience's imagination.
It's really funny, especially because a chatbot, most of them are the most stupidest robots that possibly exist in the world. Most chatbots run off of a call and response kind of very well structured idea of conversation. I mean, of course, ChatGPT is not like that, but before ChatGPT, if you said chatbot to a data scientist, they would roll their eyes and lose their eyes in the back of their head because you're undermining all of their effort and all of their work by saying that terrible word. But yeah.
Yeah, all I use chatbots for is to say, talk to a human, like the ones on the phone that you're press one and just talk to a human, whatever the button is that gets me a human. And now I'm probably going to end up talking to ChatGPT on the phone at some point and not realizing it, which is nerve-wracking.
Well, I mean, I hope it tells you that you're chatting to ChatGPT, because that wouldn't be not cool if it didn't tell you that it was a robot.
Well, that's actually a really important thing that you bring up, right? So one of the things that you focus on is ethics. And for you, that what you just said was a very obvious thing. Yes, the chatbot should tell you that it's a chatbot, because it would be unethical to not.
Yeah.
Why do you think that that's obvious to you and not to other people?
What do you mean it's not obvious to other people? No, I'm joking. I think you're at an important crossroads of understanding how we're going to be interacting with technology from now on onwards. I mean, when we met before, we were talking about the anthropomorphization of AI, and it's this weird thing of these humans being obsessed with themselves and obsessed with what we can do, and they're trying to replicate it in these machines. But there's an important distinguishing point to make, that machines are not people. And I like to joke about how we can't send AI to AI jail because it doesn't exist. The reason why it doesn't exist is because there's no reason for it to exist. AI will never feel bad about a decision it makes. It never feels good about a decision it makes. So it's really important, for me at least, that people understand that a human and a machine is not the same thing. And for some reason, that makes it obvious to me that whenever you're interacting with a robot, you should know. Because if it's making decisions and helping you make decisions, it's important to know that it can't be responsible for what comes out of that.
In 2019, you did a talk at, I think it was in Daba, South Africa, a machine learning, deep learning conference called Protecting Machines from Us. It wasn't protecting us from machines, it was protecting machines from us.
Yeah, that's the title of the talk that I recycle and expand again and again and again, because it's such a catchy title.
It is a catchy title. Now I want to understand, why do they need why do they need protection? Why are we the problem?
Yeah, I mean, it's super funny that I'm complaining about the anthropomorphization of machines, but weird maternal type of instinct is having these little computers and making sure that they can be the best that they can be and that they're not at risk of being abused by people as if they are a living thing that care about whether we care about them. But yeah, the reason why I had that talk title was because I genuinely believe that there's this beautiful human hybrid technology future that is waiting for us to participate in it. And it's a future that makes life easier for everybody. But in order to get there, we need to make sure that we are creating machines that, of course, can help us get there. But also that we're creating the kind of trust in these machines to do what they do best. And it's up to us to make sure that they do that. And what is stopping them from being their best is all the awful parts of being human that somehow creep their ways into the machines and act as reflections of the worst parts of ourselves and then duplicate that and then replicate it at scale, right? Because that's what machines do. They just make things bigger and faster. And now we're trying to make them like us, and then they make the worst parts of us even bigger and faster, which is a terrifying thing for me because people can be absolutely awful. But people can also be absolutely wonderful. So yeah, the protecting machines from us thing was about keeping the bad parts of who we are away from our machines, the discrimination, the weird ethics issues. Also just protecting the concept of the machine from dying out because we've turned them into this untrustworthy, awful thing. And they get buried because we're too afraid of what they can do, when what they can do could be something really amazing.
I talk a lot at work about we need the organizational willpower to do a thing. So whenever I'm in a meeting and I feel like we're not moving in the right direction, I'll say, this isn't a tech thing. This is an organizational willpower thing. We as a team need to decide with intentionality that this thing needs to happen. It feels to me like we're trying to make AGIs, artificial general intelligences, like we're trying to make data from Star Trek, but we're totally fine with data from Star Trek just being like a regular guy, as opposed to the best of us, which I thought was the goal, right? Data is the best.
Completely.
And we're just going to end up with just a random jerk.
Right? And it's also really funny that you talk about it being like an act of will. It reminds me of Bell Hooks's definition of love, And when we're thinking of that in terms of the context of a machine, you do want this decision of will and intent of creating something really beautiful and really lovely. And yeah, we haven't necessarily been doing that. And I think what it also does is it completely obscures the imagination of what AI could possibly be, right? If we're so intent on making it someone that is like us, then we're kind of making it not optional for it to be anything else. And yeah, then it ends up being a jerk when it could be a blob that does cool stuff. I don't know.
For folks who may be listening who may not be familiar, Bell Hooks passed away just a couple of years ago. She was a very famous American writer, and she has a famous poem, kind of like, what is love? Love is a verb. Love is intentionality. Love is an action. It's not a noun. It's not a feeling. It's the act of love is love. So what I'm hearing you say is applying that to AI. If we just say AI is like a thing, it's a blob, it's an object, it's a black box that we don't understand. You're saying AI can be an intention. It can be a deliberate thing that we create. But I'm not getting the sense we're doing that. We're just moving fast and breaking things.
Man, that's exactly what we're doing. And I think it's kind of cool because in some ways the world does need to be turned upside down I mean, like the pandemic was an absolute devastating event in human history, but also in the individual lives of everyday people. But for the first time in a really long time, we were thinking about how the world might be different and the world might be something that we're interested in participating in, and a world that helped us be the best parts of ourselves. And that's kind of disappeared again. We're trying to go back to the world before when it was like, no, we were getting self-aware, and we've turned around and gone back. And AI is a similar type of opportunity to create something more of the world. And it's terrifying that we're not taking up that opportunity to make things different so that life is nicer.
So one of the reasons that I call myself a web person is I believe that if you bet on the web and the open web, then things will be better. And while we're all pieces of, we're all pieces in the capitalist machine,
Mm-hmm.
if we build our things on open technologies on the open web, we're going to be better. So I always prefer websites over apps, and I prefer blogs over walled gardens that are owned by some giant, corporation. So we have the situation where we have AI and machine learning and data science as an industry. And then we have this kind of weird open AI that's like, it's a company, it's a nonprofit, but it's clearly for profit. Da, 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 da. How do you build an AI infrastructure, with Lelapa and the things that you're working on that isn't necessarily dependent on this kind of world brain that appears to be getting created in the context of ChatGPT?
Wow. Well, that's the thing, Scott. We're all part of an environment. We're all part of this ecosystem. We all have internalized pieces of capitalism that drive us in a particular way. And it means that we participate in the world in a particular way. And just because you decide you don't want to participate in a particular way doesn't mean that it's possible. So this is something that I'm struggling with quite a bit, is imagining how to exist independently in a place that is so intricately connected. I don't think it's possible that Lelapa acts with its own vision and dreams, yes, sure, but it's still very much attached to everything else in the world. And I'm not sure how we're going to manage to drive change in a way that is impactful, but also separate from everything else that exists. And some of the models that we do have of trying to do that are the tech companies that we have currently, or these huge monopolies that take over a particular industry, squash all the competition, and leave no space for anyone else. And then from that position, they're in a position of power and they can make decisions and do cool things according to what they think is right. But I don't think that's the way. So I don't have an answer for that yet, but hopefully we somehow figure out how to have a more distributed, community-based way of functioning with smaller organizations collaborating with each other and in this network, rather than, following that which has come before us.
From a tech perspective, taking what you just said and applying it explicitly to the tech, the very large language models are too large. They're not on my iPhone. They are running in GPUs in various clouds. And, if you wanted to get a copy of one, it's a whole thing. You're going to need refrigerators worth of computers. But that's always the case until something becomes small enough to run on your phone. There was a time when Siri was in the cloud, and now parts of it can run on the edge.
Yeah.
What do you think about, and I know you like working within constraints, and you think that that's where people really operate. I'm wondering if there's a room for what we call on the edge AI models, where like a regular Android phone on the African continent that some regular person has will have AI models running on it. And will that be a way for them to have more power?
Yeah, totally. That's the type of stuff that I wake up in the morning and I'm really excited about. Eyes just flash open and I sit up straight, ready to take on the world when I think of those kinds of opportunities. And I mean, we were talking about large language models. I mean, ChatGPT is huge, and it still does not service all the languages in the world, right? Which means that it's still dividing the population into haves and haves not. And so that distribution can work, yes, in terms of providing edge-type devices or even more niche forms of technology enablement through like low data or low electricity usage or things like that. But also from a perspective where localizing these larger models and making them smaller just makes them more useful because they're accessible to bigger parts of the population. And they have this more niche understanding of that localized context in a way that better serves that community. So I think, yeah, a lot of the technology moving forward, if it's going to cater to a larger audience, it needs to be broken down. And it's a little bit counterintuitive because the whole point of AI and machine learning is you're generalizing over a large population. That's its power. That's the way that it is, innovating in a way that we haven't been able to do before. But it also needs to be taken back, and we need to start treating those data points as individual populations again. We somehow need to find a balance between generalizing over too big a population, but also catering to those smaller populations so that you are actually generalizing around a group that has similar characteristics.
I've done a little bit of research on this, so I may get called out by our audience who can tell us on social media if I'm mistaken. But it looks like ChatGPT has a general understanding of roughly 95 languages, but it's a very long tail. It's primarily English, and then it kind of drops off very quickly. And I'm looking at the list of languages here, and I realized that there's thousands of languages on the African continent, but I'm pretty familiar. I don't see any African languages, not even Swahili, not Yoruba, not Zulu. I don't see anything on the list. Am I wrong?
Yeah. I think their latest publication, I mean, I might be wrong, but I shouldn't be because I should know about this stuff, is that they do have Swahili and Afrikaans, and which is a little bit hilarious because, of course, yes, they're African languages with African cultures, but both those languages primarily, they come from somewhere else. Afrikaans is a derivative of Dutch, and Swahili is a combination of Bantu languages and Arabic and other things. So it still can be said that, indigenously from a historical history of the types of languages that existed in the continent, it doesn't have any of those. But also Afrikaans and Swahili, because they're so connected to other languages in different parts of the world, they're the easiest for a machine to understand. So they've picked the two easiest languages on the African continent.
Hey friends, I want to take a second and thank our sponsor, Zencastr. You know that I've been doing Hansel Minutes now for over 850 episodes. And in the old days, I would have a guest manually install Audacity and they would FTP their WAV file to me. And it was a mess. But for the last several hundred episodes, I've been using Zencastr. It's an all-in-one podcast production suite. It runs entirely in the browser. It's got now video, HD video. It's got built-in voice chat. I do footnotes. I've got a soundboard for live editing. It's absolutely brilliant. And it also uploads to my cloud. The guest shows up, they go to a URL, they record, and the next thing you know, in my Dropbox or my cloud storage, a file appears. It's absolutely brilliant, and they've even now got automatic transcripts. And they are now sponsoring the show, and you can go to Zencastr, zencastr.com/pricing, and use my code HanselMinutes, and you'll get 30% off your first 3 months of Zencastr Professional. I want you to have the same easy experience that I do for all my podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story with Zencastr. Is it because to generate, is it a snowball effect, right? It gets bigger and bigger. Like, we have a lot of English, so we train it on a lot of English. And if you were going to go and train it on, Sutu or just all Bantu related languages, you'd have to go and collect all of that text, and maybe that's not on the web, and you'd need to go and dig up any corpus, any text you can find. So is this, again, organizational willpower that's preventing us from having a very large language model trained on, for example, Bantu languages?
Yeah, I think there is some organizational willpower. I don't necessarily think that we have a company on the continent that is that big and that rich to be able to do it, firstly. Secondly, Africa is a place of oral history. So it's not like those text evidences of these languages and heritage exist, which for me has been quite a bit of a philosophical question. The fact that we need to convert these oral languages into a textual format, which is a format in which they were not made to exist. Like, how much are we really holding on to what the language actually is and what it means? And how much are we taking away by by transforming it into a form that it was never meant to be in. I think in some of the African languages, like Yoruba, have diacritics so that it describes the language and how you pronounce it. But for most of the Bantu languages, it uses the Roman alphabet. My name uses the Roman alphabet, and it was only a couple months ago that I realized that the two O's are pronounced differently, because written down, they look the same. And I also wondered why people struggled with it so much. But that's what's happening to a lot of our Bantu languages. So converting them into text, you're losing a lot of what the language really is, and you require understanding of the context and of the language already to be able to then interpret those physical markings. And then we're going to teach that to a machine. That's a little bit weird.
Yeah, that's a very complicated thing. And there's hundreds and hundreds of years of history of how like the Latin script became the script that we just happen to be using, and colonization and all those things. And then you're basically boiling down thousands and thousands of languages being transliterated into either Latin script, Arabic script, or Gaz. And those are your big three on a continent filled with thousands of languages.
Yeah, exactly. And then there isn't much like physical history of it. So it's not like you could change a ChatGPT because that amount of data doesn't exist.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Now, your company, Lelapa, tell me what Lapa or Lelapa means.
Lelapa means home. It is a word that is endemic to a particular group of Bantu languages. Isitutana, Beri, all share the same word. So it means home, but it also, some contexts, can also mean family, which for us is really beautiful because it signifies a place for African AI to come home to and be developed in the best interests of this family that we're catering for. Yeah, so that's why it's called that.
And one of your first products is you're working on a thing called Vula Vula, natural language as a service for underrepresented languages, which gets to like we just talked about the complexity of like how that can be a challenge. Are you hoping that people will be able to interact with AI to solve real world problems in their language of choice, in their format of choice?
Yeah, totally. I think an important concept that I've been trying to inject into my language when I talk about these things is not using AI to solve problems, but using AI to enable people who are already solving problems to solve those problems better. So, for example, if a doctor is having to speak to lots and lots of people in order to help them, in South Africa, a lot of doctors, much to their disappointment, get like stationed in some random rural area somewhere far away from lots of things in the middle of South Africa. And they don't speak the language and somehow need to figure out how to help people. And how do you describe a certain pain in a particular area, in a particular part of your body? And there's a large gap in that communication, which of course affects the type of service that a patient then receives, but also affects the service that the doctor is able to give. And I mean, that's in a doctor situation. It's similar with a banking service or a legal service, any kind of information sharing platform that enables people to interact with a component of their lives that might make it a bit better. So Vula Vula really is taking language technologies that exist in the West, which have been made in the West, adapting them to our local context so that we're able to make sure that people who don't speak English as their first language, in South Africa it's only 10% of households that speak English at home. We have 11 official languages. And people are having to learn, they're having to bank, they're having to go to doctor's offices and dentist offices. They're having to sign legal forms and legal papers in this language, English, that they don't necessarily always understand. And if they do understand it, it's because it's the status quo and not necessarily because it's an option for them not to. So yeah, Vula Vula is a language as a service to be able to enable people to speak their language. And that's such a huge thing, especially in the South African context where for many years under apartheid, you were prevented or you got into trouble for speaking your language. And even the years following that, after we were liberated, you still got into trouble for speaking your language because people thought that you was, I nearly said skinnering, that is a very South African word, gossiping that you were gossiping about them. So yeah, people should be able to speak their language, and just because they speak their language doesn't mean that they shouldn't be able to interact with the rest of the world. So that's what Vula is about.
So the overarching goal I'm hearing of not just Vula, the product, but Lelapa AI, the company, is to combat some brain drain that is happening where folks leave home and always have big plans to return, but never do. You're going to have a home for AI. Like, what can we tell our audience about, who may have left home, who could maybe come back home and work on AI? They can do that at somewhere like Lelapa.
Exactly. And we hope that we're able to set up a model that helps us enable other entrepreneurs and other companies to do the same. My sister always laughs because made me laugh. I studied in Japan for almost 3 years, and I was doing my master's in engineering there. And going there, I expected to be absorbed into this like high-tech, super impressive environment. When you think of Japan, you think of robots bringing your food at a restaurant or things like that. And some of it is that way. And she jokes about me leaving that environment to come home to Wakanda, which is really funny. But yeah, the Wakanda doesn't exist just yet, but it can and it will. And I hope that other people are inspired to do the same, to leave shiny places and foreign worlds and come back and contribute to their own, because there's a place for them. I think a lot of people leave because they think that there are opportunities outside, and often there are. And some people look to Africa as a place of loss and lack. But for me, those two words are synonymous with opportunity, It just means things can get better, and that is so exciting.
That is very much a glass half full kind of perspective. Like, one can look at something as being, well, we lack, but another person can say, well, we're going to be working under constraints. And it's under constraints when great things happen, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. Totally. That's where my brain is at.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about, like, we are in a world now where all these wonderful, and I apologize for my Star Trek references, but like the universal translator, like, it could happen. And these models, these AI models, are going to be able to run locally, these edge-based models that will not necessarily require, huge power-consuming cloud models.
Yeah.
Are all, again, a matter of organizational willpower. We have to decide to do them.
Yeah. And I mean, edge devices are also really good because they assist with issues like privacy, So, I mean, you're shrinking these huge models down from these massive things that use a lot of electricity. They create carbon emissions. You need massive amounts of data to do it. And they're centralized, which means there's central control. And instead, you could have this distributed framework which protects people's information, does things faster and cooler in much smarter ways. And I'm so excited about that.
Well, I'm excited to have been able to talk with you today. Thanks so much for spending time with me.
Been lovely. Thank you for inviting me.
We've been chatting with Pelonomi Moiloa. She's CEO and co-founder at Lelapa AI. You can check them out at lelapa.ai. We'll have links in the show notes to her talks, her companies, and more information where you can get involved in AI for Africans, by Africans, solving African problems. This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.